Test 1 2 3. Test 1 2 3.
Good morning, fellow friends and growers. I'm going to give you just a second to take in the new stage or setup we have here. It's going to look and feel different. I got up super early this morning to move this bookshelf that you see over my shoulder from the basement up to where I am now. So you would have no way of knowing this, but in the videos that I've done in the past, the long form videos, which I intend to start up again this week. This bookshelf was sitting over my shoulder with that sign with the ridiculous message. It's not such a ridiculous message, right? The message today is reduce friction. So now I have my setup to where I'm going to do my live streams, my long form content, and this is my desk right here so I can do my editing and work too. That's enough about me. If you're new to this channel, I wanted to give you a brief overview of what Meg is, who am I, who's this guy talking to you, this ginger bear. Everything's weird about this. So, I am Andy. I'm the founder of Meg's Edible Landscapes. I started Meg in 2020 to help people like you have successful growing experiences. And that's, after today, what I'm really trying to captivate or articulate is having a successful gardening experience. Of course, if you've seen enough YouTube content or Facebook or Google search for helpful gardening tips, I'm not necessarily going to be that guy, but I am going to be the guy that can help connect the dots from all the massive amount of data that you see on social media and what actually works in real life for me and from my perspective. So if you see these herbs over my shoulder, those are grow bags. They're quarter-gallon grow bags. And this month I'm featuring my basil plants. So if you wanted to see what basil looks this time of the year, for me, this is what it looks like. I have 5 different types of basil up there, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But more to the heart and soul of what this YouTube channel is going to be going forward is connecting the dots from information that may or may not be relevant to your gardening situation, but I'm going to do my best and try my hardest to connect the dots for you. And most of the information that I'm going to be sharing, again, comes from my experience as a commercial grower, and I grow primarily in containers. So if you've always wanted to grow in a container, or you've thought about it, or you've seen some TikTok videos or some YouTube videos about container growing and you weren't sure where to start, I'm that guy. If you grow in the garden and you have a 5 acre garden, I might not be that guy, but I can tell you that some of the information crosses from container gardening over to your situation. And like I said, I'm all about the experience. So if if you've spent any amount of time consuming information and it seemed overwhelming, that is where I shine. I love to come in and try to. You can think of me like a guide or somebody that can help you wade through the murky waters of just information overload with growing edible plants. So, once again, I'm Andy. Welcome to Meg's Edible Landscapes. So that's kind of the backstory on me, what I do. This year has been a massive change for not only this channel, but also for what I do for the business. I started off in 2020, right after the great toilet paper crisis. It's kind of PTSD for a lot of us, and I, uh, I like to bring it up just because it's kind of funny to laugh about that time frame of. And for me personally, I didn't believe the toilet paper crisis until I went to our local Target in town and saw with my own eyes that, yeah, they're out of toilet paper. But shortly after the toilet paper crisis of 2020, I started Meg's Edible Landscapes, and I actually started growing right out of the gates in grow bags like you see behind me. I sold those at farmers market up until this year. So this is the first year in 2026 that I did not sell any plants at the farmers market. So I had to break the heart of the market director, but it was a necessary choice because I've now moved the business from farmers markets into working exclusively and specifically with senior living communities and also therapeutic gardens. And what that looks like is think of speech therapy, occupational therapy, any type of therapy clinics where the clinic owner or directors would like to bring plants into the picture to assist with different types of therapy like feeding therapy, sensory therapy. I could go on, but those are two of the biggest ones that I have seen from plants that I produce and share with these therapy clinics and how they're able to use them for therapeutic purposes. Now, I mentioned senior living community, and today I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because out of most of the work that I do, 80% of it is working with senior living communities. And I was blown away this past winter when I started doing a little research, and I actually got into the senior living communities by accident. I can't remember if I shared this with you on this channel, but since we now have a new feel and a new look to how this looks on Saturday live streams, I wanted to share a little bit about how I even got into senior living communities. And this all happened by accident. So up until this year, I was doing, you could call them pop-up instant gardens with container plants. So think of grow bags, like the big brothers and big sisters of these basil plants behind me, in pot ranges all the way up to 10 gallons. And that could be anything from lettuce, kale, chard, cherry tomatoes, zucchini, cucumbers, mini pumpkins, the list goes on and on. But I had enough customer requests and asks at these farmers markets to put a package together of different types of plants. And what that ended up resulting in was a CSA model. So I reversed the CSA model a few years ago when I was getting enough ask and pull, I guess, for this. So instead of CSA, if you're not familiar with the CSA, a community supported agriculture system, that's where you or a customer would team up with a local grower or a farmer. They would grow a predetermined amount of vegetables and fruits, and then every week you would get a share or a box. It might be every other week. It depends on the farm or whatnot. So since I was doing something kind of different, I borrowed that business model just because it's the easiest for my potential customers to understand what I was doing. But I flip-flopped the model. So instead of coming out to me to get produce, I brought the plants in the form of container gardens to my customers, and I did that up until this year too, because I have gone full speed ahead into the senior living communities. And just to tie this story all together, is like I said, I got into the senior living communities by accident. I tried to pitch one of those gardens to a my first senior living community. I felt very foolish, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. I told the director too there that I felt I felt a little embarrassed because what had happened was they had a massive renovation project going on at their building. I was unaware of that. I didn't do my research. To date, I have done my research every time I've gone to make a pitch or make a sales call. But what happened out of that sales call is, even though I couldn't do a CSA style or a pop-up garden, I was requested by the what they call a wellness director or activities director at this location to do a 30-minute or 60-minute program. So basically, think of like a workshop with plants like these ones back to the basil over my shoulder, doing a speaking workshop. And I can tell you at this point, we're mid-July. I now at this age, I'm this many years old, and I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. If you've never been around senior living communities with their gardening program, it's for me, it's fantastic because it checks a lot of boxes for me on what my natural talents provide. But just seeing from a third party or my viewpoint on how much these programs mean to these seniors living at these communities, that's probably the most meaningful part of what I do these days, is just seeing the real, you could call it therapeutic, the real impact in their lives that I see immediately. So when I show up to a program like I did this week with these basil plants, you can immediately see these residents light up, especially ones that were farmers or had gardens of their own, or maybe they've never touched the seed in their life, but they're interested. Just being around these plants has a therapeutic value that I now have a much deeper appreciation for, and just seeing how that impacts these seniors' lives is it's huge. So that's majority of what I do now. Having said that, as we go forward on these live streams, there's going to be more content revolving around senior living gardening. So if you have been with me since I think February when I first started doing these live streams, I appreciate you. I am not abandoning you. Just know that there's going to be more content uh, surrounding and encompassing what I do with senior living. That does not mean we're not going to be talking about, or we're not going to be talking about plant nerd stuff, because I'm still going to be getting into deep plant nerd stuff. It's just going to be a little bit different, the feel and the look of how this live stream goes going forward. And I intend to be inviting more directors. And so that's one interesting thing too. I had to learn earlier this year was to learn terminology, and I'll just share some quickly with you. I usually ask for activity directors now at these communities. Before, I would try to figure out what that position's name was, and sometimes you'll see titles, or I see titles like activities director, wellness director, therapeutic rec director, life enrichment director. They all, as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're one of those professionals, the education background is a little bit different. The therapeutic rec directors seem to have a lot more of a big degree component or college, higher learning aspect to that. But I've also found certified music therapist, which is very cool. I was totally unaware of that position in this world before this year. Um, I've also reached out to a lot of certified therapeutic horticulturalists. So that's a fancy word for somebody that works with plants but is licensed just like you would have a certified nurse or a doctor. Um, I think they also call it board certified music therapist, which is similar to what I had mentioned about the music therapy. But there's this whole world that I was unaware of until earlier this year when I stuck my foot in my mouth. I tried to pitch a garden, and I kind of like Alice in Wonderland, I fell down into this hole, but I came out the other side, and this is just a beautiful world of working with senior living communities. So anyway, that's the introduction to the new Meg live stream and what we're going to be doing on here. I also intend to invite these directors in future live streams so you can hear more of their background and what they're trying to accomplish. And also, like I said, with the really in-depth plant nerd stuff, I'm not going to be abandoning that. We're going to still gonna be getting into the nuts and bolts of deep science with plants. Having said that, I want to reach out, and I plan on reaching out to professional growers. So, with specifically what I do, it's super niche. I have honestly, I'm going to be having a conversation here in about a week and a half with somebody else that's doing the exact same thing I am, but on the other or the East Coast. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to see if I can get that business owner on this live stream too, because uh, I figured with over 300 million humans in the United States, there's probably somebody else that's working with senior living using plants as a medium to do these programs, and I wasn't wrong. There is somebody. And if in fact, if you've stumbled across this video today, this live stream, and you're in this community, you work with senior living, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear what your experiences are. So uh, that's the new Meg. This is the new feel. This basil plant behind me are these basil plants, and I should probably introduce the basil plants. I tend to rotate through the plants up here too, but with these seasonal programs I've been running this year, they actually started in March when I was doing demos with my strawberries. We did hand pollination of strawberry flowers. I have a video that's on my YouTube page here that actually shows the process of how I do that. It's a lot of fun, and what I love about that is that it relates to different types of senior living. So real quick, if you were unaware of how this works, I had to learn some more terminology this year so I knew who to talk to. So the senior living communities they take different shapes and forms. Some are big, large chains that have multiple sites. Those types of senior living, they typically have multiple types of services or residents that live there. So some of them will have independent living. So those could be like townhomes or smaller homes, or they could be in the larger building. But they're kind of independent, so they're on their own. You have assisted living. So those are the ones that may need a little bit more help through their day-to-day lives. Memory care, dementia care, that's primarily this year who I've been working with. And from my vantage point, that's who I've seen who have had a huge beneficial impact of these programs. It's interesting, some of my clients don't have as much green space, so it's very nice that I have a container growing program to where I can literally bring these plants anywhere. So I have a bunch of quarter-gallon grow bags behind me on that tray. That's one of the trays I actually bring with me to these programs. So really easy to carry in. If we have like 15 memory care residents, we could do a 30 to 60-minute program just off of that tray right there. And it's a lot of fun. So that's memory care, dementia care, and then also skilled nursing, so traditional nursing homes that you might think. All four of those um, those groups, they have different needs and different requirements on how they relate to plants or how these programs are run. So I jumped right into the fire this year, and it was kind of learn as you go. And at this point, I have done this for since March this year. I definitely have more knowledge and information on how I relate to these different types of communities. And I'll share one cool aspect. Assisted living, the very first assisted living community that I worked with, it was a potting activity at the beginning of May, and uh, I had already worked with a lot of memory care, dementia care residents, but the first, I'd say 2 minutes, and this goes for any other communities I work with, within the first 2 minutes, I have a pretty good idea how this program is going to go. And that's one of my favorite parts is seeing the different types of personalities. And it's specifically for this assisted living community, this was a social hour for these guys. So it was a lot of chatting and it was a lot of fun and enjoyable overall. But that's how I saw that one from my viewpoint, vantage point was that uh, they were here for the more of the social aspects. And speaking of social, a couple of my clients have taken me under their wing as far as bringing me into this whole world with training. I actually received some really good training from some of these communities, which I really appreciate that. And a couple of things, or I should say, they had similar requests on these programs, and the social aspect was one of them. And that's regardless of if I work with skilled nursing, dementia memory care, assisted living, independent living. Social was one of those items. Some other items were physical, so some type of physical aspect of this, whether that be like this last week we were staking tomatoes. So everybody has different ability or a willingness to do different things, and that's fine. Some people or some residents would rather watch everybody else work. That's perfectly fine. I adapt around them. Some are okay with uh, pushing a 4 foot bamboo stake into a 7 gallon grow bag for a indeterminate or a vining cherry tomato plant. So I try to get the maximum amount of participation when we're talking about the physical aspects as possible. Um, and so that's the second one. The third one is cognitive. So a lot of these, I try to incorporate some type of education element, not make this like a bachelor's like horticulture 101 or 201 level course at a university. It's not that. This is very more common knowledge and stuff that I've shared on this channel, but I try to adapt it to the community. So where I can, and this is just from my own experience this year. As time goes on, I know when I'm talking too much or getting too into the weeds as far as plant nerd or the science, because I start losing people. So I try to bring it back to the physical, like getting hands on plants before I start to lose the audience. Um, so that's another one. Emotional is another one, and this one has been the most amazing to me. It's something that I don't typically think about, but I'm gonna give one example of a plant that blew me away. This month I was sharing two different types of kale plants. They're both smaller dwarf kale plants. One's a blue Scotch curly leaf, so that's a green plant, curly leaves. I always introduce that plant as a super plant, and then I mentioned how my family loves kale chips. So with these programs, I typically ask residents if they have any favorite recipes. So having said that, I had this plant I introduced passed it around so everybody could touch the plant, the curly leaves. And then as that was going around, I had introduced the second plant, which is a purple kale, curly leaf, also called scarlet. It's a beautiful plant. I typically talk about the ornamental value of some of these plants too. So ornamental edible, where they're not only edible, but they have a ornamental, aesthetically pleasing, beautiful part of it. This one community I was at, memory care, dementia care, something as mundane as a purple scarlet kale curly leaf plant actually triggered a memory for one of the residents there who I was told after the session doesn't talk much. But as soon as this resident saw this purple kale plant, it triggered her mother's garden from her childhood. And that was one of the coolest moments of that day of how a purple kale plant was able to unlock a memory in this resident to where she was talking and talking and talking about this garden, these memories of working with her mother in the garden and then using this red kale in recipes. And I've seen this over and over and over again. And that's why, again, I'm kind of modifying this channel and how we're going forward because there's going to be a lot more of this type of information. My goal also is to share the knowledge and information I've gained this year with activities directors and wellness directors and therapeutic rec directors as we go forward, so everybody can kind of learn from everybody. Um, so that's that. I would love to tell you about the story from this past week. I had a couple of sessions, and then yesterday was an exciting day. I got to visit the Minnesota Veterans Home in Preston, Minnesota. So you know where Rochester, Minnesota is? This is about half an hour drive east of Rochester. It's a fairly new facility. I reached out to the activities director there. I think it's a therapeutic director is the title for that position. But I reached out because I wanted to know more about what these veterans are doing with horticulture, with plants, to see if they need any assistance from me or just get an idea of what this program's like. And me being a retired Army veteran after 22 years of service, I I wanted to get into these communities to start helping out these veterans in any way I could. So yesterday, I met the rec director down there, got a tour of the facility. It's a beautiful brand new building. The drive up to the building itself is up kind of a S-curved hill. They've planted trees on either side of the driveway. So, man, in 10 years, this is going to be this great kind of shaded with these mature trees over the driveway. It's going to be a very cool experience. When you get up to the top of the hill where the residency is or the building, they have a couple parking lots off to the side, but immediately I saw the gated in courtyard where they have some raised beds. So I met the director inside. We chatted for a minute and then we went on the tour of the facility. So uh, they have multiple different wings on this building, and they have raised planter beds, which is common, what I've seen at a lot of senior living facilities. Something I've learned this year too is there's a couple different types of raised planter beds that work well for different types of residents or clients. There are, and a lot of the ones I've seen that are made out of wood, I would steer away from those just because you have the natural rot of the wood. They look nice, but they're not going to last as long as some of the composite materials. So a lot of the facilities I'm seeing at this point are going with the composite material, which will last quite a bit longer. But some of these planter beds are like a V shape, so something I would never have thought about. But if you have a V-shaped planter bed, you can easily wheel a wheelchair up to it. so a resident can actually interact with the soil or the plants. Something I never thought about before this year, but I'm sharing it now because these exist out there. But we saw multiple planters that they had on this patio. They had some residents that are taking care of them. One of the residents named Jim that I met, 20-year Air Force vet. We chatted for a while. I told him I loved the Air Force chow when I was stationed on an Air Force base years ago, and he he talked to about the food in a positive view. So if you ever heard that military food is awful, that's not true. It just depends on which branch of the service you're talking about. But I've worked with all the branches of the service, and by far the ones that have the best chow hall food are the Air Force, and they do their food right. Funny story about that. My daughter asked me earlier this year. She heard a rumor, I think from a classmate. The rumor was the Army serves steak and ice cream before they're going to deploy, and she was curious to know if that was true. And I'd like to answer that question here and now, and the answer is yes. That's how we knew a unit was deploying when I was in active Army status, Federal Army, is steak would come out, or sometimes steak and shrimp, surf and turf, and then the ice cream would roll out, and we knew somebody was deploying. So if you ever heard that rumor and wondering if that's true, it's absolutely true. But anyway, back to this veterans home. They have some raised beds set up. They're growing tomatoes, some peppers. I saw some sunflowers. One of the beds caught my attention. That's what I want to talk to you about now. It had hot peppers, so I asked Jim about that, and I noticed it looked like they had cayenne peppers and maybe red Thai peppers. I didn't ask about the Thai pepper plant, but I did confirm they had cayenne peppers. And what's interesting about that plant is that I just kind of took a mental snapshot of that plant, and then as we walked through the rest of the property and touring other plants, I was told that they have, and I saw bird feeders around the outside perimeter of the building, but they have problems with raccoons ransacking these bird feeders. So, this is my question for you watching this live stream right now is, have you had problems with raccoons or squirrels or skunks or any other type of furry friend besides a bird accessing the bird feed? Because here's what I did. Now knowing that they had issues with the bird feed and that they're growing hot peppers, I mentioned as my free tip for the day, I said, it would be a great activity for your residents here to dry out those cayenne peppers. You can use a coffee bean grinder or somehow crush them up and then put that cayenne pepper in the bird seed. This is something I learned this year is that birds don't have the receptors for capsaicin, so the spiciness of peppers. That's interesting that I heard that this year, but the timing was perfect because I was able to share that information with this rec director. So as far as the grand scheme of senior living, this would totally be an activity that you could do for just one activity is, uh, and you would have to be careful about it because you wouldn't want residents to get cayenne pepper on their fingers and then touching their eyes or whatnot. So I haven't really thought about this through on how this would actually work, but that's what I love doing is solving these types of riddles and how do we got a problem, we got a solution. How do we get from the problem to the solution? They'll figure it out. But I'm curious with you, have you ever had problems with raccoons or squirrels ransacking the bird feeder? And what was your solution or what did you do? Did you try using hot peppers in that bird feed? And I'm going to go peek at the comments over here because I see a lot of stuff coming up. So, hi, Shawnee Groves, listening in from the garden. I'm sure the garden's doing well with the cool weather of the last couple days. And I see Michael's with us today. Nice to see you, Michael. Michael's down northern part of Alabama. Oh, this is interesting. So, Ecology Today or JBot says due to bird flu, I have not been using a bird feeder for a few years. Okay. Yeah, that's something I hear about bird flu every once in a while, but since I primarily work with edible plants, I'm not really paying too close of attention, if that makes sense. Oh, this is interesting. So, Ecology Today, to become a horticulture therapist, you need to complete foundational education in plant sciences, human sciences, and horticulture therapy, gain supervised practical experiences, and apply for professional registration through a regional association like the Canadian Horticulture Therapy Association. I I was pretty sure Canada had an equivalent or something very similar to the American Hort Therapy Association. So I appreciate you adding that to the chat. Oh, and then Ecology Today is following up with congregating birds as part of what spreads the bird flu. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. So the certification, this is something very early this year when I was starting to get into this environment or this community. I was looking at the certification, but I am coming at it from a different angle. So we have time, right? So I always am cognizant about time, and the reality is I don't have the time right now to go after the certification. And I'm not sure if it's even appropriate for what I'm doing. After talking to other certified horticulturalists or therapeutic horticulturalists, they've spent all the time learning their craft and getting certified. So I don't represent Meg or what I do as certified therapy. I'm more of the nuts and bolts guy. What does that mean? That means if you, as a community or a senior living community, or maybe if you are the director or owner of a speech language pathology or occupational therapy clinic, and you want to bring plants into your therapy, I can make that happen as far as providing the plants that I've seen work. And after consulting with the licensed therapist, that's what I do. I actually provide the hardware, the plants. That's it. As far as the practices and the therapeutic value of these plants, that's where I draw the line because I'm not licensed or registered to go beyond that point. So I don't make claims that I'm a registered therapist because I'm not. What I am is I'm very good at growing in containers like that and bringing healthy plants to a community. And how that community wants to use those plants is entirely up to them. But Meg is the nuts and bolts company that makes this happen. What's very cool and what I can do is like the example with the pepper plants and the bird seed is that's the type of connecting the dots from problem to solution that Meg and I can provide. I'll give you another example. So a lot of these communities have different types of equipment. Some have raised beds that you may have at home. Some grow bedding plants or other types of edible plants in the ground. Something I saw this week that I had not thought about and it was a new occurrence was one of these communities had problems with rhubarb. If you've grown rhubarb, you know rhubarb is very hardy. So it's very hardy in our cold Minnesota weather over winter temperatures, but it's just a tough plant in general. So they had a rhubarb plant that was not doing as well. And after I investigated, I found that this bed that the plants were in had a lot of sand. So from my experience and knowledge, uh, if you have just sand, and I think this was left over from when they built this building, that's not going to work so well. I have talked about in the past about different types of soil composition, and so sand will work for propagating hardwood perennials, but when you're talking about doing any type of annuals, biennials, or even rhubarb, there's going to be some issues because sand has no nutrients in it. It's great for allowing water to flow through it, but as far as the plant getting set up for success, it's not going to work so well. There's something else too I want to mention that I've never mentioned before is, and maybe you've heard about this, but I sometimes get asked about different types of containers. So like terracotta or maybe plastic containers anyway. Uh, there's this idea about putting some type of rock or something that's not soil at the bottom of the container. And I always advise against that. And the reason why I advise against this, and you may already be aware of this, is that when you get two different types of dissimilar aggregates, so back to the example of what I saw this week where we have rhubarb, we have some really nice healthy potting soil around the rhubarb, but then all around the rhubarb and below the rhubarb, it's sand. It's just sand. So between those two types of aggregates, I gotta look at the chats to see if somebody mentioned it yet. Uh, JBot or Ecology Today says my native soil is primarily sand from ancient lake beds. I add local free yard waste to improve the soil. Fantastic. So I haven't seen it in the chat yet, but if you get two different if you get two different types of aggregates that are too dissimilar in the size and the shape, you get what's called a perched water table. So stick with me here for a second. So same thing as if you put rocks in the bottom of a pot and then put potting soil on top of that, like peat moss, the structure of that aggregate is very different. And when we get into the science part of water, water is a polar molecule. It also there's these cool chemistry terms we talk about adhesion and cohesion. And if if you remember your high school chemistry, if your teacher did talk about adhesion and cohesion, then you'll remember that water likes to adhere to itself. Uh, what's interesting about that is that this is how water moves up through the vascular system of a plant. So you can think of two water molecules. They're kind of like holding hands out. They're grabbing each other and they're pulling themselves up through the plant. That same thing's happening if you use two different types of aggregates below your plants. The water above where you have like rock or sand, it can't flow smoothly because the water molecules are holding on too tight to each other. So you have what ends up being a perched water table. And even though you have sand and something that drains really nicely below it or rocks, you're actually drowning the roots of your plant. So if you forget everything else that I just said, remember that if you have two totally different types of aggregates around your plant, you're going to drown your plants. And I don't want you to drown your plants. We want to set our plants up for success. So to answer the question about should I put rocks on the bottom of my pot, don't do it. Perched water table, you're going to drown your plants, or there's a very strong possibility that your plants are going to drown. All right, Michael mentioned my soil is clay but very rich due to at one time being a cow pasture. That's actually a bonus right there. I have chickens and ducks, turkeys. That I'm loving what I'm hearing for as far as the nutrients. They have are my fertilizers. Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking when I was reading that. I have lots of earthworms. Man, this is sound like a pretty good setup. And some mushrooms. That's fantastic. Yeah. Uh, so what's cool about soil science, if you take a soil science class at a college level, we actually did experiments uh, with this exact thing in at Oregon State University. So we used a simple rectangular sponge just to demonstrate, and I'd encourage you to do this after the live stream today, is that with a rectangular sponge, if you immerse the sponge in water so it's soaking up as much water as it can, and then you hold it so it's flat, you can see how the water reacts, and then you can see when you flip it onto its narrow end, how the water will flow off that sponge. It demonstrates the principles of how water flows through soil. But like I said too, this is how water actually gets pulled up through the vascular system of plants. And I won't go too far into this, but it is pretty fascinating how water gets pulled up through the vascular system by these simple chemistry principles through adhesion and cohesion. So again, just think of water molecules holding hands as they get pulled up. If you think about it, this is why it's super detrimental to a plant's health if anything happens to the vascular system. Or sometimes you might think of or hear about people with some type of trees where they're actually cutting into the vascular system. Or if you have any type of natural damage through a storm, maybe you get stems that get broken partially. You're actually disrupting the vascular system. So once you open the wound in the xylem, where the water comes up into the plants, it's very hard to get water up um, past that point, if at all. So um, anyway, like I said, if you forget everything I said, perched water table, we don't want perched water tables. We want uh, as much of the soil to be similar as possible when we're planting up our or potting up our plants, whether that be in a container in the ground or in the raised bed. Ecology today says soil is, or the solution is to mix the soils with the range of natural soil amendments. Amen. Yep, absolutely. Yes, 100%. So that's that. I'm trying to see if we have any more comments that I want to mention before we move on or get caught up on these. Michael says, I'm on top of a mountain. I do have rock. Yeah, we all have rocks, I think. So we're blessed here in Minnesota, just the upper Midwest in the U.S. with having a very nice loam. But if I dig down far enough, I'm gonna get to like heavy clay. So that was, and I'm gonna touch on this briefly. If you live in a newer home, newer construction, so let's say, I don't know, last 20 years built, it's very possible that you're not going to have any topsoil. And it's really frustrating because our last house that we had was a new construction built in, I think, 2010 or 2011. What the developer did is what they typically do in the upper Midwest is most houses have a basement. So they'll come in, they'll dig out the soil. So they get rid of the topsoil first, or they typically scrape the topsoil, put it in a pile, and then they have to dig out or dig down into the lower layers that usually have the silt and heavy clay or whatever your base material is. Then they build the basement or the foundation, and then after they built the house, they don't put the topsoil back. So my theory is I think that topsoil goes to a third party and then gets repackaged and then sold back to us as healthy topsoil. That's my theory. I don't have any proof of it, but all the new housing developments that I drive by, I see these mounds of topsoil and I kind of just want to go over with a dump truck and put it back to where it belongs. Especially when you look at the historical documents on your location. So what I did is, and this is a good tip for you too, University of California, Davis, if you check out on their college website, there's a soil, uh, I'm drawing a blank too, and I apologize, I should have had this document right. But they have a service on there to where you can actually see the historical data for your soil, and then the classification for your soil. So it has, I'm not sure if it has Canada, but definitely the continental United States. You could be anywhere. So we're here in Minnesota. You can go on UC Davis, use this tool, and you can see what soil you're supposed to have at your location. So there's different types of soil classifications depending on the amount of sand, silt, and clay. We've talked about this in the past, so I won't dwell on this too much right now. but depending on your percentage of sand, silt, and clay determines what type of soil classification or what they call um, your soil that you have right there. So the past house that we lived at, being a new construction, when I went to plant apple trees, we did some cherry bushes, Hanson's cherry bushes. I did some vining grapes. I found out very quickly that it was going to be very hard, if not impossible, to grow all these plants because we had zero topsoil. And after using that tool from UC Davis, I was supposed to have about 2 feet of topsoil, which I had none. So what this looked like is that the builder was nice enough to put sod down on our backyard. But what happened anytime we had a major rainfall or just a rainstorm, the water would pool up in certain parts of the yard because there's no topsoil like a sponge to hold it. And then also it would run to creative paths through the yard. Because since there's heavy clay, it doesn't take long for that clay to get fully saturated. And like I said, since there's no topsoil on top of it to act as a sponge to hold it, uh, the water that was already in the clay already, it wouldn't take long for it to be fully saturated, and then the rest of the water is just going to run off. So we had massive erosion, and we had a lot of problems. Not to mention the fact that when I tried to grow some of these perennials, it's very tough first to dig a hole in this straight up clay for this plant to begin with, but then it's hard for that plant to get established because it has to work harder to get through the clay soil. So what we end up doing is I end up building 16 4x8 by foot deep raised beds, and that's how I got around it. So the fruit trees and the grapes and raspberries and cherries, whatever, it took them a lot longer to get established. And as we continued to grow them, I would add more compost around those plants. But they struggled for quite a few years before they could actually get to a point where they were somewhat happy, if ever. Uh, the raised beds did fine, but that was one of the reasons why I went with the raised bed for our backyard gardens, just because I really didn't have another option unless we truck truck after truck of topsoil back into a yard, which the sod's already down on there, so I don't know. But if you have the same experience too with your new construction house, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about how you handled it. Did you do a raised bed like many of us did to try to solve that problem? Did you go with containers? Did you truck in topsoil or maybe compost to try to get some type of that organic material back? Love to hear about how you solved that problem. But yeah, looks like I'm all caught up on the chat. So anyway, last thing I'd like to do is introduce these plants behind me. I have 5 different types of basil plants, and actually, I guess I can bring them up here a little bit closer. Get to see these. This is part of the plant show that I typically do. Um, this is lime basil over here. So if you ever want to see lime basil, that's lime basil. I can't do lime basil without lemon basil, so my lemon basil is right here. This is my favorite basil of all time that I've ever grown lemon. If you've ever used Lemon Pledge, this smells like Lemon Pledge, but it's the natural source of Lemon Pledge. So lemon basil, fantastic aroma. It's just a great plant. This plant right here is Thai basil. I started growing this many years ago because I had customers that were asking for Thai basil. If you never had Thai basil, it's got a sharper flavor to it, but it's a great plant too. I have cinnamon basil right here. Cinnamon basil right here. And then one basil I don't have here on my collection is sweet or Italian large leaf basil. So that's the most common that folks grow. If you ever make like pesto or bruschetta or something like that, that's the type of basil that will go on those. So the cinnamon basil is kind of a fun plant too. I'm gonna flip this around so you can see the rest of these guys back here. Right here I have Greek oregano, so I grow Greek oregano and Italian oregano. Greek oregano right here is going to have a stronger aroma to it in my experience. So this one I like to take out with me when I'm doing programs or workshops because this one's a lot easier to smell. The Italian oregano does have a scent to it or aroma, but it's just not as pronounced as the Greek oregano. And then this guy right here is not a basil or oregano. This is wild mint. And I'm thankful to that seed company. I didn't order this. I actually ordered some other seeds or herbs a couple years ago, and they threw a packet of wild mint in with the rest of the seeds that I received. So that was very cool because this wild mint, I always tell people before they smell this, I said this has a very strong minty flavor, but it's kind of like uh, nature's gum. So that always reminds me of chewing gum when I smell that wild mint, just because the scent has come off of it. So I'll probably share the mint plants that I have too later on, because I do a bunch of different mints. Mint's just a fun plant. And then I always talk about in these workshops about, I always ask after I introduce the mint plants, has anybody ever had problems with mint getting out of control? Because mint has different ways that it spreads. And I've heard from more than a couple people about how the mint just kind of spread. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but if it's something that you were aware of and you want to make sure that you didn't let the mint get out of control, grow it in containers. So those quarter-gallon grow bags, they work great for mint or any of the smaller herbs or the annuals, just for the size of that plant. I want to say one more thing about these basil plants behind me too. If you ever buy, and I hope I don't get hate mail after this, but if you ever go to the big box stores or the larger wholesale nurseries, you buy basil or annuals, and you see that like basil in particular, it's very bushy. If you actually ever look at the base of those plants, you have more than one plant. So on here, right here, this is I got two plants in here. You see from the two main stems. And a lot of these have two. So this, again, there's two main plants in there. And if you've ever grown basil, you probably know if you pinch off the tops, it'll start to put out more stems off to the sides. You get that bushier appearance. But I'm sharing this part with you because if you don't pay attention or you didn't know about this, this is valuable information. Those bigger plant nurseries or retail stores, they might sell you a 4-inch pot that might have like 6 or 7 plants in it. What I would recommend is when you get that pot home that you actually pull the plants out of the container, separate the roots and separate the plants. If you don't, those plants are going to be fighting each other for nutrients and water, and you could end up having some problems. So uh, that was a piece of information I learned years ago that I wish I would have known earlier, but I now know and I want to share that knowledge on with you too. uh, Jay says we need smell-o-vision now. Yeah, that would be fantastic. And if we did, I would say we're living on the in the time of the Jetsons because I think they had something similar. But yeah. Anyway, this is the new look and feel for Meg's Edible Landscapes going forward. I really appreciate you spending your Saturday morning with me. I'm looking forward to continue the conversation into the future. And I would say if you live in Minnesota, just be aware that we have a heat warning that I think starts today and goes till Monday. We'll see how this actually pans out, but they're talking about heat indexes in the triple digits. So if you're in Minnesota, make sure you're drinking water and staying hydrated and take care of your plants. And look forward to growing with you this summer and have a great week.